Blessings, BookTube. Today I'm going to take you through a video that I have been meditating for over a year that got so complicated I had to strip it back down to its bare bones. So hopefully this won't be overcomplicated. I'll give you a simple vision of my iceberg of literary criticism. First thing I want you to think about literary criticism as a genre, like sci-fi or fantasy, something you enjoy, right? That has certain conventions, things of that nature. Kind of thing that you would read. And I encourage you to read literary criticism. And the way I got out of doing all the complication, giving you tons of names and isms, is that I'm going to do a tier review of my favorite literary critics in a follow-up video to this. So today we're just going to do a little brief overview of literary criticism through the ages with Hamlet. All literary criticism is criticism of literature. So we have to have literature to talk about. I chose Hamlet because, okay, it's a play, not a novel. But, I think that in that we consume TV the most nowadays, that's probably the genre we know best. And it's got poetry in it, so it sort of covers all the literary bases, and hopefully it's somewhat well known. And it's also the pinnacle of English writing. So here we go, Hamlet. Ghost story, right? Boo! Starts off with a ghost. There he is. And he tells Hamlet, hey, you need to kill your uncle. He killed me. And that's sort of how the whole thing starts, as you recall. Now, is it a ghost story, though? No, it is not, in certain ways. It has a ghost. So if it's not a ghost story, that means there must be something to this ghost storiness other than just having a ghost. And there is. For example, this ghost appears in the very beginning. Very often in ghost stories, the ghost doesn't appear for some time. They want to keep you in suspense, keep you in fear of the ghost. What we imagine is many times worse than what we see. Another thing is the tone, right? The tone of this ghost is not a particularly scary. He's your dad. You recognize him. Yes, he was killed. That's bad. And he wants you killed. That's even worse. But it doesn't have the tone of scariness that a ghost story would have. So we've already got something interesting to think about. This idea of, is there such a thing as genre? If so, what is a ghost story? How does that work? Well, maybe it's a revenge story. Okay? Maybe it's a revenge story. These are super popular. You've got, Braveheart. You've got every other 80s action movie. They came, they killed my family, and now I'm going to hunt them all down one by one and kill them all. So maybe it's a revenge story. Now, this is the level that you already know these. These are the tropes, right? We call them tropes when we don't like them, conventions when we do. But yeah, these are all the things. What does a revenge story have, right? It has initiatory violence from the villain. So it's got a good villain, things of that nature. Well, this doesn't really fit too much because we don't really actually spend a lot of time in Hamlet looking at the king and looking at the queen and who Hamlet is supposed to kill. We really stay with Hamlet. And Hamlet doesn't want to kill. And that's very different from a revenge story. Revenge stories today, people want to kill, right? It's more in the, let's call it, what do they call those? Vendetta type stories. But really, if you think of it, what if you had to kill someone? I mean, even if you really wanted to kill them, outside of like an army situation, I guess, maybe, I don't know, an executioner, you think about it, right? It's taking a human life. Hopefully that doesn't come too easily. And that's what's really interesting about Hamlet. So we're coming down, we're getting already a little more nuanced, a little more interesting. So the thing below the tropes that I really want to talk to you about is the literary criticism itself. And to do this, I'm going to look at family, okay? For me, I'm interested in Shakespeare, okay? Some people don't like to talk about the author, but Shakespeare sort of gets accepted. And we know about Shakespeare. We know a little bit about his background, his other plays. For me, Shakespeare is very interested in family. If you think about his big tragedies, for example, you've got Hamlet, right? The child versus the parent. You've got Lear, right? The child versus the parent. or excuse me, you got Hamlet, the parent versus the child, Lear, the child versus the parent. You got Othello, the spouse versus the husband versus the wife. You got Macbeth, wife versus husband. These sort of family dynamic stuff. So we know about this. This is psychology. That's going to get us down into this difficult area, maybe down here in theory, but I don't want to go there yet. What I want to talk about is movies. I think that this is going to help you understand. So Shakespeare writes plays. This is a play. It's written in a certain type of poetry called iambic pentameter. Okay? It's written in 5 acts. Many plays are written in 3 acts. Why is this one written in 5 acts? Okay? These are just things that you can notice about the play by counting the syllables and listening to how it sounds, right? Ideally, plays are meant to be seen. You could probably, if you had to, if I told you there were 5 acts, you could probably figure out when and where they break and when one act breaks into another. You might not right away, if you don't have too much literary practice, recognize that, hey, I think this play is happening in 5 acts. But if I told you there were 5 acts, I bet you could take them apart. I know you could take apart the 8 beats of a typical movie nowadays. What is it? Swing the cat, save the cat, whatever the latest thing is, right? We know movie structure. But that's not what I want to talk about when I talk about movie structure. What I want to talk about is there's way more freedom than that in literature. Thank God. Even in this, you'll see the freedoms that Shakespeare is taking. So when you think about these tropes, this is at the story level, right? What's happening? The thing I want you to know is that there is a set of skills and tools that the writer is using to make those things happen. So if you think about a play, a movie, sorry, the movie has its story up here, right? But we are experiencing it through lighting, music, cinematography, set design, all of those elements. Those exist in literature. And we don't know about them very well, and they're not talked about very well anymore. And that's what literary criticism is. It's about the C's. The C's. Craft, context, character, the creator, Shakespeare, the C's, okay? That is literary criticism, okay? You can remember it because criticism starts with a C. So all of the technical stuff that is making this happen. Let me give you a few examples. So, for example, the unities. There was a fellow named Aristotle. Aristotle, you can't really see these, sorry. There's going the wrong way. This just says the 3 C's. And this is my beautiful picture of a family. This says 5 acts. And this one is the 5, you have the iambic pentameter. Unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. Okay. So the 3 C's or 5 C's, however many C's you want. This one is the unity. So I put 1, right? TPA, what is that? Unity of time, place, and action. So Aristotle said a play should take place in 1 time frame, 1 place, and in 1 action. Whereas in Hamlet, you've got people in Denmark, people are going overseas, it's stretching out across time. He's not following this, right? So we can already see that there are choices. There are different ways to do these things, right? Different ways to do even a play. This applies to plays. Aristotle's rhetoric applies to plays. All right, so everyone loves to talk about world building nowadays, but there's a globalization that happens at the kingship level. Right? This is not any old family. This is a king's family. So these are secession stories. If you look at history, how many wars have been fought over who's going to take over, right? There's always a fear. Your kid's going to kill you. They're going to try to take over. So this is starting already to dip below into what today everyone's obsessed with, which is theory. But really these bubble up between the two, right? But what I do want you to know is that this level exists, okay? This critical level exists. And some people will say, just look at the text, right? That's a kind of a theory as well. But really the text is the starting point. We could talk about the creator. We could talk about Shakespeare. We could talk about the context, the Elizabethan era, right? Why did he write his histories in a certain way? Because who was king, a queen at the time that he was writing. Here you have the slash through the text because later in the theory area, this becomes sort of meta text and all kinds of playful things with deconstruction and all that stuff. But I'm going to put actually the kingship, and maybe I'll put globalization right there with it. More up in criticism land. All right. So obviously there is money, right? Power. There are today in the theory arena these Marxist elements, right? Marxist criticisms, reification, all of that good stuff. This is in theory land. Here's our movies. I told you this looks like how we do things in the movies, the 3 C's. There we go. You have all kinds of theories available to you nowadays as different ways of reading things. There's feminist theory. What is the place or lack of place of the women characters, lack of agency of the women characters in Hamlet? Shakespeare wrote some amazing women characters that were very much heroes. So we know that he can write strong women. When he does or doesn't choose to do that, why? Why the women in Hamlet? Okay, you've got reader response. What I'm trying to show you is that these things aren't things that you should be afraid of. I can find you videos on BookTube right now about global reading, women's reading, even Marxist readings. In fact, for something called reader response, this says BT equals RR. For reader response, we've never had a better era than BookTube, Goodreads. We've never had more information and data about the readers themselves, so that we don't have to just rely on the text, and the text should probably be right here in the middle. There we go. We don't have to rely just on the text and the author. We have the reader's viewpoint now, which we can get at, which before we really couldn't get at other than like some vague, reviews in the newspapers, literacy rates, things of that nature. All right, so kind of wrapping up here. These theories can get extremely complicated. And I'll give you just one example, not meant to scare you, but to give you an idea of how deep this can go. As I said, when I was in high school and I was being told, I didn't even put that on here. The way I was taught Shakespeare in high school was that the fatal flaw, FF, I should put an FF in here somewhere. The fatal flaw is what defines Shakespeare. All of his heroes or heroines have a fatal flaw that ultimately determines them, so it's sort of deterministic, right? They will fail because of this flaw no matter what they do. And Greek drama is kind of, so we go back to this level, right? Greek drama is kind of different because what they do is they'll pit two moral imperatives against each other. So you're not doomed by your fatal flaw, psychological or something of that nature, family. You're doomed more by the fact that you must avenge your mother's death, but you must avenge your father's death, but you mustn't kill your mother, right? Your two values equally strong, and you're caught in between. So those are personified by the gods, but really it's moral imperatives. All right, so here's Freud. So as I said, nowadays, if I were doing this text, I would look more at the family level, especially with regards to kingship succession. That's what I find very interesting about Hamlet today, is this idea of taking over power in family dynasty ways. But let me tell you the way that I was working back in grad school. So you have, as I said, you can find all of this on there today, including Marxist stuff. You have a lot of psychological readings of books on BookTube. Now, they might not be strictly Freudian, but Freud, the reason he's important is he sort of opened up this idea of psychology. Believe it or not, there was a time when people weren't talking about psychology or things in terms of psychology, which we do all the time now. So that's sort of represented by Freud here. But in a more stricter sense, so the Freudian thing would be like kill your mother, kill your father, marry your mother. So we have that here in Hamlet, but in an interesting replace way, right? Because it's not directly kill your father, but kill your uncle who has taken over the father's place. So that's an interesting level. But then you have an existentialist. So that would be another thing down here. We could call this, I'll leave it blank. That's very appropriate for existentialism. You can have existentialism is a philosophy of being, of existence. It's an ontological thing. It's about being. So the idea there would be to take the Freudian idea and say, oh, the idea of killing your father isn't psychological. It's about becoming your own protogenitor or your own raison d'etre, your own reason for being, right? Closing the circle on your own being, becoming your own initiator, and that's what it means to be your own father. And so this existentialist reading of a Freudian reading of the family situation of the revenge ghost story, which is Hamlet, would be a sort of, now I think sort of somewhat sophomoric reading that one could find a literature student doing in grad school. But it's not necessary to have those kinds of readings, I would argue, are quite fun, combining different things, right? What would it be if we combined a Marxist feminist reading? Or what would it be if we had a global, reader response reading? How are the BookTube videos different in languages other than English, right? Is BookTube Indonesia different from the kinds of videos that are appearing on the BookTube in English, right? So what I want you to think about is all of these theories, right, at their deeper levels. Keep them down here in theory land. Don't worry about them too much. But bubble them up into this craft area, how things are being crafted, right, of criticism as a tool, as a fun way to read a genre, right? This genre deals with money in this way. This genre deals with women in this way. Nothing here, I guess is what I'm saying, to be afraid of. So let's take an overview look here from the top. We've got our ghost, and we come down to the trope level, right? The story of, whoops, I'm not doing a very good tropes there. The story of revenge. Oops, there's revenge. Okay, and then we pull out a little bit. Now we're getting down into the criticism levels. 5 acts, family, iambic pentameter. This is the movie level, right? Movies, how it's done in the craft, the C craft. Okay, unities. Are we using the unities, the ancient Aristotelian unities? Or text? Are we more interested in text or are we more interested in the author? It's, to me, silly to lead the author out because the author is one of the readers and one of the parts of the text, right? Along with their, what we could call anxiety of influence, the authors that influenced them before. They're all falling off here. But anyway, you get down here into BookTube response. There's my Freud picture. Do you like him? Oops, that's the world. Where's Freud? With his, there's cigar. So there you go. You got your money, world, all that good stuff. All right. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense and demystified literary criticism for you a little bit. You just think of it as a genre and a craft and a way of crafting things with different rules that you can apply or ignore, different theories that you can use. Now, one thing to think about theory is, think about a literary movement. Now, there are movements that people are participating in the time of creation. So, for example, you think of surrealism, right? Andre Breton, he's writing the manifesto of surrealism. The surrealists in his group, they are meaning to write surrealism. Surrealism is a title they themselves are embracing and using in real time to write their stuff. Versus stuff that comes later that we add on, right? If you think about, I don't know, a Marxist reading of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, right? So that would be, obviously, Chaucer wasn't using Marxist ideology at the time of his writing Canterbury Tales. He had ideas of family, royalty, and the globe, right? The plague was global, right? Phenomenon. But he isn't it interesting. So feminism keeps wanting to fall down here. No, no, we must have you. You must stay. There you go. I'm going to hold you on. So we've got these ideas can be applied in the moment or later on. So that's just one thing for you to think about when you're doing theory after the fact, right? So, for example, an author might appear retrograde in terms of sexism to our ears today, whereas they might have been progressive at the time of their writing. They might have actually been forward thinking, but of course, today there's a different standard. Now, I would ask you to question your assumptions of progress always, that you think there's always, an obvious, easy value judgment to be added to that. But basically, criticism, literary criticism, a lot of fun, can be put on the iceberg here in a way that helps you to understand a basic revenge story, ghost story, in a certain way that ends up with a character who is hesitating almost to the end. Is he going to or is he not going to commit murder? It's a mystery story too. Whoa, blows your mind. All right, so these are icebergs. If you like them, let me know. I can do more of them on all kinds of different literary themes. If you have questions, I hope you do, because I poorly explained a few of my points here. I've been thinking about this for a year, so that my head is so full of stuff, but I'm trying to keep it simple. But anyway, if you have questions, please put them in the comment box, and so we can have a back and forth. And also, if you have things that you think I left out or that are super important to include, or that I've oversimplified, I welcome critiques. I never get critiques in my comment boxes. I like them. I'm not afraid of them. Thumbs up and subscribe.